Welcome back to Path to Med. Today's guest is Laura Redden, so it's really nice to talk to you today.
Very nice meeting you.
So, she started off by earning her medical degree in Mexico and then went on to do a PhD in pharmacology at the University of Toronto in Canada. So, she's now spent over 20 years working in clinical development and research and shaping how patients are treated. So, it's really nice to talk to you today.
Very nice talking to you too. Thank you for having me.
So, to kind of start off, what first got you interested in medicine or science in general?
Well, I come from a family of physicians. My dad was a physician, my mom was a physician, and my older sister was in medical school at the time that I had to decide where to go.
Okay.
So it was a big part of my life, even as a child.
Yeah. Was it kind of always something that you knew you wanted to do and pursue?
Yes,
Okay.
that didn't change since I was a kid. I was interested in helping people.
Yeah. So, you got your medical degree outside of Canada, but decided not to practice here. So, what kind of led to that decision?
Well, it's maybe a little bit more complicated than that. I
Yeah.
actually did part of my internship in Canada. I did a
Okay.
rotation at the Clark Institute of Psychiatry and also at the Addiction Research Foundation. So that was during my medical training.
Yeah.
I loved what I found here. And at some point, I wanted to become a psychiatrist, specifically a child psychiatrist. That
Yeah.
was my plan at the time. Went back to Mexico, obtained my degree, and when I was planning to come back, they had actually closed borders for all foreign
Okay.
physicians. So I had to find a different way. I wanted to have the experience. I wanted to go back, and for me, I guess my motto: when there is a will, there is a way. So I had the amazing opportunity of having met someone at the Addiction Research Foundation who became my supervisor for my PhD, Dr. Usanda Busto. I contacted her and she had actually, I worked briefly during my internship with her and she suggested that I should forget about a residency program and to come and do research. So I thought maybe that's a way to get into the system. So I got a scholarship and I did a postdoc for 2 years at the Addiction Research Foundation. So that everything changed there.
Yeah. Was it kind of difficult to step away from that path, or did you feel like you kind of found something that fit you better?
I didn't step away from medicine and I haven't
Mhm.
done it. I continue doing medicine. Eh,
Yeah.
So I think it's important for students who listen to this podcast. Medicine takes many forms. It doesn't mean
Mhm.
taking one path or the other. At the time, I thought I was because I discovered research and developing new medications and studying diseases and understanding them better. So you actually increase the knowledge about medical diseases. And so that was something I discovered, and I fell in love with research. So that's when I decided that I wanted to continue after a postdoc, that I wanted to do research. So I started my master's and a PhD.
Yeah. Because the medicine is so, like, vast, and there's so many jobs within it, um,
Yes.
that some people don't even know about, and there's so many things that kind of intersect. What made you decide to do a PhD in pharmacology specifically?
Um, Pharmacology is the understanding of how drugs enter the body and also what happens to the body after a medication enters. So it's basically the understanding of medicine and development of medications. So this is a type of research that ultimately is applied to patients. I wanted to help patients. I had the opportunity to meet people in the pharmacology department, and I wanted to explore that area. So that's why I pursued pharmacology,
Yeah.
specifically clinical pharmacology.
So you work in clinical development now, which honestly isn't something that most high school students know about. So, how would you kind of explain what you do to someone that doesn't really know much about the field?
I'm going to complicate things even more. Clinical
Okay.
development is really, really broad. And
Yeah.
there are different areas. And as a physician, you can work in different areas. What allowed me to get into clinical research is not only because I have an MD, it's also because I have a PhD. So I have the medical knowledge to understand diseases. And at the same time, I have the research knowledge to be able to evaluate the safety of the drugs and to develop protocols. And I know how to study drugs. So clinical research basically it goes anywhere from the time that a molecule is discovered or created with a potential to treat a disease, but at the time you do not know it. It goes is evaluated first in cells, in animals. There are models to evaluate different diseases in animals. You provide a disease, you learn whether it's safe and also whether it works in those models. And then it goes into clinical research. That's where I have been involved. In clinical research, basically, there are four phases of development. They go from phase one to phase four, and it's all the process that a compound goes through to be evaluated in humans. In healthy volunteers, then you move into people who have the disease, then you go into the large international trials where you evaluate the efficacy of the drug. And at that time, you file it with regulatory agencies once you have shown that it's safe and effective. And then there is phase four, where you study a drug after it's in the market because you continue doing that. So I have worked in those four areas from phase one, healthy volunteers, all the way to marketed products.
Mhm. It's
So
probably really interesting, like, kind of working through each of the phases and getting to see the process of each one.
absolutely,
And then you're, like, involved through the entire process. And
absolutely.
it kind of sounds like you use all, like, the knowledge and education that you've gained throughout the years, like, it all kind of, like, intersects. So, yeah. What does a typical day in your life kind of look like? Or is your day-to-day very different depending on what you're doing?
Let's put it this way. My job right now, I work as a consultant. So I help different pharmaceutical companies, usually biotech. These are very small pharma companies that they are just starting to develop a drug and to understand it. And often they do not have the experience or the funds to have someone full time. So my job right now is very different from the kind of job that I used to do when I first started and I was hired into big pharma.
Mhm.
So let's, and maybe I'm just gonna give you some examples of differences. When you start in big pharma, basically you work in these huge teams. As a physician new to development in pharmaceutical industry, at the beginning you're gonna be looking after, let's say, one study and you are involved in developing the protocol. How are you going to study efficacy, safety? And you work with a huge team of people who know about what is called the pharmacokinetics of the drug, how they work, people who
Yeah.
know the safety of the drug in animals, people who know statistics, people who know regulatory aspects of how to make it to the market. But you're in charge of what is safety. That's how you learn. And you're an individual contributor. Depending on your interest and experience and the time you work, you continue advancing. At some point, my day, it was as the global project head for well-known medication. At some point, was considered the most successful medication in the world.
Wow.
So I had a team. Well, my team was across the world. I was in charge of 23 clinical trials and physicians in different areas. I used to travel around the world, meeting with both regulatory agencies as well as experts in the area. And it was absolutely fascinating. So that was my day to day then. Right now, after all the experience that I have accumulated working in big pharma, I started my own consulting business. That was probably about 10 years ago. And that is because, as fun and wonderful as it is to travel around the world, doing research and learning science and dealing with regulatory agencies, I wanted to have more balance in terms of life and work balance. So that's why I'm a consultant. So now, with all the experience I had, allows me to be a consultant and to be helpful for all these little pharma companies. And I do a little bit of everything because I have experience in every aspect of clinical research, from the medical perspective, scientific, regulatory, writing articles. So it changes. And that's one of the things about clinical research. It keeps changing, it evolves. You can follow your interests, and it completely opens a different areas that when you are thinking about medical school, you would have never even considered it. So you can move depending on your interest. Right now, I do a lot of safety and I'm interested in it.
Well, you mentioned that you kind of get to follow your interests, and you've worked in some really different areas like neuroscience and rheumatology. So, do you get to kind of choose what you work on, or is it more based on what the company that you're working for needs at the time?
Definitely your interests and qualifications are what get you where you go. However, whatever you learn can be used in different areas as well. So, for example, my PhD was in neuroscience, and at some point I became one of the world experts in a particular receptor in the brain, which is the dopamine D3 receptor. And I had publications there, and I knew the area, I knew the people who worked on that, and that's why I was hired by Abbott Laboratories, now AbbVie, in the US, because they didn't have an expert. Um, I worked in neuroscience at Abbott Labs for several years, and that was what I was interested in. Um, Later on, because of performance, and I guess the senior management was happy with my work, um, they asked me to move into rheumatology and basically to have a leadership position there because they liked what I was able to do in neuroscience. And so that's how, but of course, I had a say in it.
Yeah.
I thought it would be an amazing experience, especially I didn't have the area expertise in immunology and rheumatology, but the people who reported to me were rheumatologists and immunologists. So at that point, it's a leadership position. You know how research has to be done, what has to be done, and you surround yourself by experts. And that's how you run a big study. But it was my interest, and of course, it was my decision. Now, as a consultant, I can use everything that I have learned in the past. And usually, my clients, these biotech companies, they contact me and they tell me about their projects. If I'm interested, I take the projects. If I'm not, I don't. The way that I usually select my projects is this a new medication for a disease that has no cure. Usually, those are the ones that I select.
Yeah.
And that's where I like working.
So, is your job right now more focused on the science side of things or more about leading and working in teams and running projects? Or is it kind of like a combination of the two?
Okay, so when you work in clinical research, you are not only one person working. You
Yeah.
work in teams. Clinical research is in teams. There is no one in the world who knows everything. There are people very knowledgeable about various aspects, but ultimately, what gets a drug into the market, a drug to be studied properly, is team effort. So, as a physician in research, you are responsible for the safety of the drug. You're responsible for ensuring that it's efficacious, that you study it in a proper way, but also that you understand all the safety of the drug. There are other people who will be working in other areas. So I have never stopped working in teams. Right now, as a consultant, I do not direct teams,
Hmm.
but I'm part of a clinical team. or several clinical teams, I should say. And I'm the expert in the medical area. So they rely on me for all the medical decisions, for all the safety decisions, etc.
So, as a consultant, what kind of projects are you working on right now? Like in general?
Right now I'm working. There is one neonatology project. So this is in newborn babies, obviously, and it's a condition that is called HIE. So, okay, I'm gonna make it simple. In some babies, there is a problem at the time of birth, and their brains do not get enough oxygen. And because of that, these babies often have issues in terms of neurodevelopment and also physical development. And right now, the only treatment available for them is to put the baby in, like basically to decrease their temperature. So it's called hypothermia. So it's called cooling the baby down for 3 days. Whenever you suppress oxygen into the brain, there is inflammation. So by putting the babies in these coolers, you
Yeah.
decrease the temperature and the inflammation is a little bit less. However, I mean, it's a barbaric treatment in a way.
Yeah.
And what I'm working on is developing a treatment. So it's a pharmacological treatment to avoid this kind of inflammation and hopefully treat these babies. So that's one project. Another project is in respiratory medicine. So that's COPD. So it's congestive obstructive pulmonary disease. This is a disease that affects a lot of people. And it's also in terms of trying to decrease time when patients are hospitalized by decreasing inflammation. A third project I'm working on is on transplant patients. So there are people who develop hematological diseases and cancers, and they receive a transplant. And there is this horrible disease that happens in many of these patients and has very high mortality.
Yeah.
Is a medication to try to treat this condition. So these are the ones that I'm working on, and I have recently been approached by another company for a rheumatoid arthritis drug. So I pick and choose. Often there are clients who arrive and tell me about projects, depending how busy I am or how interested I agree to participate or not in their trials. But ultimately, what you have to do as a consultant, not to promise more than what you can do,
Yeah.
and do the best you can, because ultimately you're trying to help develop a new drug and to treat patients that right now do not have any other options of treatment.
Yeah. You've kind of mentioned this a little bit, but what parts of your job do you love the most or kind of find the most interesting?
It's not boring.
Yeah,
It's not
for
boring at
sure.
all. You keep learning. You are continuously learning. You have to be continuously reading the literature. What is the new research? You interact with people who are extremely knowledgeable. I love learning, and
Yeah.
for example, and respecting all of my colleagues in different specialties. When you work in a particular specialty, most of your patients have similar diseases, and you become an expert. And yes, you continue learning about the diseases or new treatments, but you just remain in that area. When you are developing drugs, you have the opportunity to touch more people, not only your individual patients. If your drug works, and suddenly there are thousands or millions of people, in the case when I was working in Humira, being treated by your drug and feeling better,
Yeah.
it's an amazing feeling. The clinical research is for someone who loves learning, who would get bored with only doing one thing.
Yeah.
That's what I love about it, is continuously learning more things.
I mean, the way you've kind of described it, like, it doesn't sound repetitive at all. Like, it sounds really, really, like, varied and which is definitely interesting. And you kind of get to see, like, your work pay off in the end once kind of like you mentioned, like, at the end of a trial, which is really interesting. Are there any parts that you kind of find challenging or frustrating? Or
No,
for the most part, is it pretty positive?
for me, I mean, for some people, maybe frustrating not to know, but that you have to continuously learn. But for me, that's not a problem. Um,
Yeah.
Not
Kind of
really. I love what I do. Honestly, I
yeah,
absolutely love what I do. And actually, and that's why going back to the time when I started my PhD, at some point, I remember my parents, being physician, told me, "Are you throwing away what you've gained by
yeah,
being a physician?" And no, it was completely the opposite. I think I gained more by being a physician and moving into research. I can touch more people. So the answer to you, no, is I have not found it frustrated. I love it, and I love it when it works. Although you need a high threshold for frustration. Some,
yeah,
most of the drugs do not make it to the market.
yeah,
So, but when one gets to the market and it helps people, it's the best feeling in the world.
yeah. I mean, it kind of just sounds that people working in your job just need to be really, like, passionate about what they do and genuinely interested,
Yes,
um, in, like, the field. Yeah.
absolutely.
So you would kind of like, would you kind of say that your medical background still shapes how you currently work?
I
Because, like, the
wouldn't,
way you phrased it was kind of yeah.
I would not be able to do the job I do if I was not a physician.
Yeah,
Basically,
yeah,
I'm the safety physician. I'm the physician of the team.
yeah.
But it's my PhD what gave me the tools to be able to apply my medical knowledge and developing drugs.
So you've worked with companies around the world, as you mentioned. So what has that experience kind of taught you about leadership or even just working with people and groups in general?
Um, Teamwork is extremely important, and you will always run into people who think in a different way to what you do. Sometimes, when you are in a leadership position, yes, you can say, "Oh, we're going to do this or we're going to do that." But I think for me, the most important thing to remember is that everyone can bring a good idea. Everyone has an opinion. You cannot implement all of them, but as a leader, it's important to understand where people are coming from. And by understanding and relying on the capabilities of your team, you can do a project better. So, so in terms of leadership, yes, you have to learn how to move things forward, but you also have to um, support your team to help
Yeah.
them develop. So it's how to say. Sometimes there are different difficult people. Sometimes there are people who are easy to work. But everyone is trying to do their best. As long as you understand where they are coming from and try to direct that positive energy towards the same objective. Sometimes people will realize, okay, I see where you're coming from. This is a very interesting idea, but it's not going to work either because the patent of the compound is going to expire
Yeah.
or because we're doing something different. So leadership is often understanding your team and helping them all together to find the best way to do things.
Yeah.
The other
So
thing, oh, sorry.
yeah, no, go ahead.
The other thing that is very interesting and that I learned about when you work with international teams, there is a culture component, and it's very important to familiarize with what are how decisions are made based on the concept and to make sure that you're communicating the same way. Sometimes there are nuances from the language or culture, so you have to be aware of that. For being an effective leader, it's important to understand also the cultural variation of your teams.
Yeah. It's actually so funny that you say that because this year I took an international business course in school, and it was basically what you said it was. It was kind of like, um you had to pretend to be kind of a representative from of a certain company, and then our final project was kind of like establishing operations in a different company, and we had to kind of research like the customs and like the norms there, and it was really really interesting.
Absolutely. And I think that people tend to interact better when you are aware of their cultural differences. And they are often interested in teaching you. So there is nothing wrong about asking them. It's like you don't want to offend them. For example, I can say in terms of Asia or going, let's say, Japan or China, there are some big cultural differences in terms of how to address people, and learning about them, it will really improve your ability to interact with them and to work with those areas in the world. And the same is for, I mean, many other places in the world. So
Yeah. So for people that are kind of thinking about clinical research, do you think having a PhD or really, really deep science knowledge is necessary, or are there kind of other ways into the field?
there are different ways. For the type of job that I've done, I found specialists that they arrive into pharma from clinical practice.
Okay.
However, it takes them longer to understand because what you do in practice and the way, or even in academia, because there is clinical research in academia and there is clinical research in industry. I took the industry path, but I was raised, if you want, in academia. So,
Yeah.
for example, the way that you do things in academia, you cannot necessarily use them in industry. Industry is much more rigorous. And because of regulatory, eh, I guess, norms, you cannot do things that you would easily do in academia. So I think that for getting in a job as the one that I've chosen, yes, there is definitely interest for research, and a PhD will help you to get into a higher position faster. But it's not it's not critical. I think everyone can learn. So anyway, there are different ways to get into research. For me, it was education, and I started working at the time that I was 33. At the time, I had basically an MD, master's, PhD, and two postdocs. So that's when I
Yeah.
joined industry. Some other people, like right after finishing medical school and a specialty, they can join, but and they learn on the work. So it depends on what you're interested. As I said, there is always a way if you're interested in doing something.
Yeah. So this is a little bit different, but what is the job market like in your field right now, especially in Canada versus like in other countries? I'm not too sure if you know about the other country aspect, but I
Well,
guess in Canada.
yeah, I can tell you a little bit if you want to do, unfortunately, the kind of research that I've done usually would be Europe, Japan, and the US. And
Yeah.
the reason for that is most of the headquarters for research companies are in those countries. So when I finished my PhD, I had three job offers in Canada and one in the US and one in Europe. I
Okay.
didn't. It was not my plan to leave Canada. However, I because I'm always curious about exploring things, I went for the interview to the US. And I, unfortunately, the degree to which research is taken in industry at that time, I just felt that I was defending my PhD all over again. These people were
Yeah.
so knowledgeable. And it was very interesting. So I thought it's like, I'm going to go to the US for 1 year, get experience, come back to Canada. Ultimately, I stayed in the US for 17 years.
Wow.
I know. So
Yeah.
it's fascinating. I've learned a lot, and after, of course, I never forgot Canada, and that's why we came back. We love Canada. But at this point, when I started as a consultant, because of the breadth of experience that I've accumulated, I have never looked for a client. Clients look for me. So in my case, I don't have any problem finding a job. It's very easy because I have a lot of experience. Um, when you're starting, it's difficult because you have not had experience. So entering
Yeah.
is the difficult part. In terms of job opportunities in Canada, there are pharma companies here. Usually there are affiliates. Um, and as an affiliate, if you want into clinical research as a physician, yes, you end up as a could be an associate medical director or a science liaison, and you do research for sure. However, the origin of the research you do is usually dictated by headquarters. I believe that there are some changes that the government is planning to implement and to develop more drugs in Canada. And I think that would be amazing for everyone who's looking for position in clinical research.
Yeah. So you think that like in the future there'll probably be more
Yes, and I'm not saying
like
that
more of
there
a
are no
presence?
jobs. Yes, and I'm sorry I interrupted you. I'm not
Oh
saying that
no.
there are no jobs. What I'm
Mhm.
saying is the kind of job is different. What attracted me from the kind of work that I encounter in the US, and actually I had a job offer in Europe as well, but I decided I didn't want to go that far. Um,
Yeah.
it was the degree of research and freedom. When I got job offers here in Canada, they were really good. However, I would have been reporting to someone in headquarters, while in the US, I became the head of the department. And I had people who reported to me in other countries.
Yeah.
So it depends what you look. I mean, you are still doing research. You are doing good things in terms of developing a new drug and helping. So it's everyone is important. It just depends what you are interested in and at what degree you want to take it.
Yeah. Are there really big differences between working in industry versus like academic research?
Yes, basically, um, many things are discovered in academia and tested in academia, and eventually there are partnerships with industry whenever something is discovered and to take it into the market. When I say take it into the market, that means that you can go to the pharmacy and actually get your medication.
Yeah.
Industry, I it was a very difficult decision for me. In academia, basically, you are free to follow anything that you want to research. As long as there is a budget or you can get a grant. A grant is usually money that you get from a health organization, either in Canada. In my case, when I was doing working towards my PhD, we were able to get grants even from the US, which now is a little bit more complex. But basically, you follow your research, the analysis you do, you analyze it the way that you want to analyze it, and usually you can publish results from very small number of patients, and it's really interesting because you're in the at the front of discovery of new treatments. However, in industry, the difference is much more strict in terms of you have to follow specific, for example, even the kind of statistical analysis that you use, the kind of things that you're allowed to do in industry are much more regulated. So they are much more stringent. And that's why many times things fail. But that's the way to demonstrate because you're using these very high standards to demonstrate, yes, this works.
Yeah.
So it's much more stringent. What I liked in industry and what it attracted me is that I was going to be able to work in an area that I was passionate about, neuroscience at the time, and they have all the funding there. So you don't have to be using your time in sending grants to different agencies to get finances. Your financial support is there already. You have to present the company as long as it's aligned with what the company wants to develop. You can do it. So it's a little bit different in that sense. Ultimately, I found that scientists and physicians in industry are as passionate as scientists and physicians in academia. Unfortunately, academia sometimes tends to see as physicians in industry as going to the dark side because it's associated with big pharma companies and money. But
Yeah.
as a physician, that's not your area. Your area and the passion of the physicians that I met in industry is to develop a new drug to help people. And I think that's what drives all of us who work in clinical research. Doesn't matter if it's industry or academia. But
Yeah.
those would be the biggest differences that I see. And yes, I got into fights with commercial people because they want to present things in a particular way. But as a physician, you are the one who says, no, you cannot do that. And we are presenting it this way. So,
Yeah.
so there is a degree of power and responsibility also in industry.
Yeah. And like ethics wise. Yeah,
Absolutely,
that makes sense.
absolutely. So we continue pursuing the same goals as we do in academia in terms of it has to be for the benefit of the patient and
Yeah.
you're the one who's responsible for that.
And do you find that like the job prospects in both like academia and industry are pretty similar or are they kind of different?
Let's put it this way: when you're really good at what you do, they are
Yeah.
similar. Of course, when you're starting, that is the difficult part.
Yeah.
One of the things that I encountered when I finished my PhD, I was overqualified for most of the jobs with an MD and PhD, but I did not have experience in industry. So that was
Yeah.
the what was more difficult for me. Interestingly, after I went to interviews, when you're good, people know they are good, that you're good. And then I got a bunch of job offers. So I guess don't worry too much about how difficult it is. Ultimately, it depends on you and how you differentiate from other people.
Yeah. So, looking back on like your whole career journey, what do you think helped you get to where you are now? Like, were there certain traits or habits that made a difference? You mentioned like a willingness to learn and like passion, but if there was anything else that kind of stood out to you.
Perseverance, sometimes and often, and I think this is for everyone, not only for me. You
Yeah.
will often find doors that close. Don't spend too much time looking at a closed door. Try to find for other doors or even a window.
Yeah.
Perseverance. It will get you.
Yeah.
And high ethics. Like, I think that ethics are very important and passion.
Yeah, for sure. And I feel like that's like especially in your job for sure, but I feel like so many careers in like science and medicine, I feel like that's important, really important.
Yeah, no,
Um,
perseverance for sure.
yeah. This is kind of my last question, but what advice would you give to your younger self or to any high school students that are kind of interested in a medical or science career?
Follow your passions
Yeah.
and don't worry if things do not work out. You will, if you continue with an open mind, you always find a way. Things always work. That's that's the only thing. And sometimes it feels that you are stuck somewhere. Just keep trying. Just keep trying,
Yeah.
looking at options, and keep an open mind. And you may find something that is even better than what you were so interested in at the beginning. Just keep an open mind. That's all.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Well, it was really, really nice talking to you. You gave me some really great advice. I learned a lot about clinical research that I had no idea about before, so it was definitely really, really opening, really, really interesting.
Thank you. No, I appreciate you doing this, and
Yeah.
congratulations on your podcast. I think it's going to
Yeah.
help lots of people, and lots of people have questions. So it's a way for anyone who's contemplating a job um, in medicine to know there are different options. And
Yeah.
thank you for doing this.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much